Hello and welcome back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell Rabin, and we're very glad that you're joining us again today. Today we are on location in Santa Fe, on San Francisco Street in particular, at the Gallery of the North American Indian, and we're standing with the producer of an incredible body of work based on the work of Edward Curtis, the renowned photographer of the Native American Indian, Neil Schauf, whose gallery this is and who has been on this trail for many years. He's been doing some exceptional work in restoring and bringing to life and bringing to awareness the work of Curtis, who is the documentarian, visual and textual, of the North American Indian since 1900 in this country. He's done exceptional work, and Neil is now carrying on that legacy. And we're very glad to be here in his gallery to talk with him and to walk through some of the photographs that are so prized and you probably have all seen at one time or another in your lives. Neil, thanks so much for coming on to the show.
You're welcome.
It's a pleasure to have you.
It's good to be here.
Yeah, good. First of all, if you would just give the audience a little idea about how it is you got involved in this, and then what this is.
Well, the works of Curtis first came to my attention about 20 years ago in a little beach town in California, where I had been retired and was just hanging out. One afternoon I walked into a little bazaar and opened an antique book and saw the first images of this photographer.
That you actually had a background in plumbing.
That was
no relationship
my history.
to the
That's
art
right.
world
That's
or
right.
the Native
This
American lore at all.
No, not at all.
Thank God you were very successful, so you were able to really
had the
plumb this line,
That's
as
right.
it were.
That's right. That's a good one. So in any event, I was struck with the quality of the work. I was kind of amazed that I had never considered the American Indian in cultural terms and that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I became very intrigued. I actually went out the next week and acquired a complete set of the works of Curtis, 20 volumes of text, 20 accompanying portfolios that contained over 2,000 photographs that he had taken. Turn of the century, 1900. He worked on the project for 28 years, recorded both visually by camera and the native songs on wax recordings, wrote the text, had a crew of 3 or 4 people.
And you have the audio versions as well?
Well, the audio versions are available. The original works are actually at the University of Indiana in their archives.
Mm-hmm.
Been there for years. And they're used often in newer visual presentations of background music and that.
I see.
Okay. There was a further thing with Curtis in 1914. He actually produced a movie of the Kwakiutl tribe up on the northwest coast. At a time, of course, there was no sound at the time. And that piece is the only visual moving presentation that's ever been done, and one of the earliest ones produced. Okay.
So what is Curtis's work? What was the motive behind him capturing the Native American at that time?
Well, Curtis was an established photographer prior to the turn of the century. He had a studio up in Seattle. He was actually a society portrait photographer, and had his first studio 1892, 1894. And kind of incidentally, he began photographing the local natives. As a matter of fact, he photographed Chief Seattle's daughter, Angeline. Was one of his first photographs, 1898. A couple years later, he was invited to photograph the Sundance ceremony in Montana with the Indians there. And he was so impressed with their cultural experience, and particularly their religious outgoing in that experience, that he determined, literally dedicated himself to the vision he had that was common of the Indian at that time, that they were a vanishing race, literally a vanishing culture. And as a matter of fact, in this event, this particular image is his image 1 in portfolio 1, which describes in his terms the example of Native Americans vanishing into the sunset. Okay, somewhat romantic implications, but that was the kind of the style and the impression on the population at that time. Right.
Now, the point was also that you made to me earlier, Neil, that the Native American Indian population at that time was at its lowest.
1900.
In 1900.
1900.
Right.
That really was the public opinion that these Native Americans were going to go away. And
well, they were really going to disappear.
That's right.
So his mission, if you will, was to capture them on film and text to, in a sense, preserve the richness of their culture that he perceived when he went to the Sundance ceremony.
Correct. And it was a very serious and significant dedication. He recognized that in these terms that the older people had the stories and had the mythology as the others. And that was his dedication, his plan. And he started off, he actually left that site in Montana and came down here into the southern territories. And some of his earliest photographs were in Hopi land, in the Navajo and the Indians. And his first publication in 1905 were the Apache and the Jicarilla and the Navajo. That was his volume 1 of text.
I see.
So he committed himself totally to that, invested the next 28 years to record 80 tribes of Native American Indians then existing west of the Mississippi. All right? He took over 40,000 photographs. The exact number I'll never know, but the final result was that his work included 2,238 odd-some images in a bound text, okay, that were produced over those period of years. The makeup was 20 volumes of text. Each volume of text had 75 volume-sized images. In some cases, it would be all about one tribe. In other cases, it would be 3 or 4 tribes. Okay, and each text was accompanied with a large portfolio. This is a portfolio-size image that contained usually 36 images of the same tribe, but all different images in context.
So, will you, for the duration of the show, walk us through at least some representation of his work?
Sure.
Okay.
That's what it's all about here.
Now, it's important for the audience to know that Neil has dedicated his life to this project. As a gallery, has been involved with this for a long time. And what you're going to be able to see today is but the briefest introductory material. And we will be, God willing, following up with Neil to document more as time goes on. We are now looking at a self-portrait of Edward Curtis, the photographer himself. Neil, could you just give us a bit of an idea of this photograph and how it fits into the larger scheme?
This is a prime example of Curtis as he revealed himself to the public. He, about this time, 1900, developed long relationships and friendships with principals across the country. About this time, he met...
You described him as a real player.
Yes, I did. We had to slip that in there, didn't we? Okay. This is how I've always seen him, because he was always on the move, always promoting. He was a magnificent talent. Nobody could ever deny that. But when I studied his background and his history, he wound up a few years later being Theodore Roosevelt's inaugural photographer. In this same year, 1899, he was invited on the Harriman expedition. Another example of playing with the big boys, all right, which was a very important trip and really added to his recognition. He accompanied the likes of Luther Burbank and John Muir and was the designated photographer for a sailing trip sponsored by Harriman up to Alaska. First time Alaska was really portrayed in a broad term.
Yes.
And eventually, as I described, he connected with Teddy Roosevelt, photographed photographed a lot of the Indian chiefs in 1904 that were invited to the inaugural. Eventually photographed the wedding of Theodore Roosevelt's daughter while he was in office. And what is of most importance, after 4 or 5 years as he was working on the project of the North American Indian, he was, as usual, requiring funding, all right? He had calculated 5 years and $200,000 or $300,000 to produce this work. By that time, he realized it was going to be a much longer term and it was going to require a lot more money. So with a letter of recommendation, he visited with John P. Morgan in 1905 or 1906 to ask for funds and assistance with the project. The outcome was, well, initially Morgan was very reticent.
Introduced to Morgan by Teddy Roosevelt.
Yes, with the letter of introduction. And so after some quibbling, Morgan was not initially very impressed with the project. But there were several photographs of younger girls in the Southwest that struck Morgan. And eventually, they came away with an agreement that Morgan would fund the project over the term, whatever that might ever be, and he would pay for the production costs of the works. Curtis would be required to be supporting the field work, which was far and away more expensive in terms of maintenance and collecting the information and doing the photography. So Curtis proceeded after that agreement and began publishing. He did his first volumes 1 and 2 in 1904, 1905, 4 and 5 probably in 1907 and 8, and continued through to 1928 and the finish of the project with 20 volumes of text and all of those with the accompanying portfolios and photographs.
Now also, since you've gone this far in that direction, could you tell us where you're picking up personally this legacy?
Well, when I literally discovered the works back in 1974, I was just so impressed with what it was and what it was about. And as I researched and studied the books that were then existing, I began to understand that this work had never been appreciated, had hardly ever been seen. All these final works were huge volumes of text that had been donated to universities and the kings of England and France and all those sort of things by J.P. Morgan. And the American public had very little realization of the quality and meaning and purpose of Curtis's work. So as I further researched, I discovered that the project was about half finished when it shut down in 1931. Obviously, Curtis finished in 28. 29 was not the greatest marketing year, if you recall the beginnings of the Depression and the fall of the market at those times.
I didn't suffer much from that crash.
You missed that one?
Thank God.
Watch out.
I missed one.
In any event, Curtis photographed the Eskimo last in 1928 and was badly injured. And the project was completed, and he kind of retired for 2 or 3 years and wasn't seen or heard of, showed up later in California. And the project shut down. By that time, it was under the direction of J.P. Morgan Jr., and all the works, particularly the printing plates and some unbound volumes, were stored in vaults up in Massachusetts. As I proceeded with my research and background, I realized that the work was not completed. Curtis' design was 500 subscriptions. So with some really deep interest, and I'm still amazed at what my own vision and my own impetus was to seek all this out. I uncovered the plates about a year later and got together some investors in this little beach town in California, and we acquired the plates, and I brought the project to Santa Fe in '78, restored the plates, developed the printing papers, and we've been producing and marketing ever since that time.
It's fabulous. It's fabulous. Could you show us some of the work that you have produced in this time?
Surely.
Great.
While we're here, why don't we take a look at this example. This was a very unique
This is the
process.
earlier work prior to
Right,
yours.
right. This is work done in the Seattle studio by a very, very then popular process called an orotone. And Curtis worked in all the photographic mediums and got really professional results in all of them. This image, Oasis in the Badland, is one of the more notable and well-known images. It's characterized by the gold framing of the time with a unique process of basically the negative being translated to a positive and then backed with actual gold pigment. These images today are very collectible in the photography market. An example of this runs in thousands of dollars in the collector's market. Okay. This image, The Offering, taken in about 1908, just north of Santa Fe here at San Ildefonso, depicts the vintage impression and color tone while in a modern framing here. Again, a very symbolic image that he would use in reference to this particular pueblo. This Apache image, Apache Gone, illustrates one of the very, very sacred ceremonies that Curtis was invited to photograph. While there's been some interpretation about this, it is the true costumes. And the way that they changed the religious order was that they moved the position of watchers. And this met with the acknowledgement of the tribal leaders. But only Curtis was ever invited or allowed to photograph such intimate ceremonies. This is a contemporary print done here at Classic Editions, and probably is the best known American photograph ever. It stands alongside Ansel Adams' Moonrise as the most produced and reproduced American photograph.
Is that so?
It is considered the classic depiction of the Native American in the West. Right? Photographed about 1904. It also is probably the most popular image of Curtis's works. It was included in Portfolio 1, the initial printing. This is the finest portrait of Chief Joseph, the Nez Perce chief who led his Indians on the last trial, and is noted in history with his description, "I will fight no more forever." One of the better images taken in 1904. This image is the Kootenai duck hunter. Very symbolic, very sensitive image. Done on probably Kootenai Lake up in Idaho. One of the very favorite images.
So beautiful.
His technique and his understanding of the environment was unique, even for his time. This image of Mosa, a Mojave native, 14 years old in southwest Arizona, was the photograph that so impressed J.P. Morgan that he made his contribution to the work of Curtis.
The look in the face and the softness of the cheeks and the eyes is not to be believed.
It shows all. It also illustrates the compassion that Curtis had and the ability to work intimately with not only the youngers but the elders.
That's right.
Only he was received.
And this?
This is Chief of the Desert, one of the prominent and dynamic Navajo images. Already Mitchell's favorite.
Among several.
His ability to capture the facial expressions and the strength and power.
God. If there's anything that just shines out among these, Neil, is the sense of dignity and regalness of the people over and over again.
Yeah. You don't ever see in his imagery a frown or a look of disdain. After the years, he would return. He had so much patience. The Native Americans look forward to his visitation.
Sure.
You know?
Beautiful.
Yes. This is the image of the storm, one of my very favorites. To me, it symbolizes the people living so distinctly with the land, in commune with the land. They built no structures. They lived off the plant life that you see here. And here there also is this little bit of reflection of people moving away into an unknown, but with strength and with determination.
Yes.
This image is a Hopi image. There's a wonderful story of Curtis's work. He went to Hopi first off in 1900. It was one of his favorite tribes. He really admired their ritual, their family mode. This depiction of watching the dancers illustrates 4 maidens, so designated by their hairdo, watching the ritual dances, probably at the winter season, taken in Hopi land near Walpi, the oldest of the Pueblo structures. Okay.
And this
is an image of Aela in his Indian mode. Mabel Dodge Lujan, his Spanish name, married. He was an artisan in Taos in the 1920s, who married Mabel Dodge.
socialite from Buffalo.
Socialite from New York, by way of Buffalo actually, who was instrumental in bringing the prominent Eastern and European artists to the West in that time frame after the war and all during the 20s. She was the person who traveled O'Keeffe here by invitation and led to O'Keeffe settling out at Ghost Ranch here in New Mexico in 1933. He was an elder chief with the Taos Pueblo tribe. Dynamic image.
And she divorced her American husband.
Well, I never checked that out.
I see. How far it went, but we do know that
being from Buffalo, we didn't look at things like that back there, you know.
But she did marry him.
Oh, yes, she did. Yeah.
Wonderful example of intermarriage. Early Sean.
And a magnificent photograph.
Absolutely.
Curtis could just capture that. Talk about dignity.
Such sensitivity.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And in this connection, we cannot pass up this magnificent photograph of this young girl. Would you, Neil, tell us a bit about her?
Well, the title of this is Kahatika Girl, and the Kahatika was a small tribe in southwestern Arizona, along the rivers in very almost untitled pueblos. This image is so powerful in its reflection, and it just further illustrates Curtis's ability to commune with these people.
Absolutely.
Very, very popular and dynamic image. This image is entitled Storytelling, Apache. And I have never discovered another photograph or even a painting depiction of this ritual, this literal rite of passage. This the way it was done. The word was passed from the older generation and the elders to the younger. And it was a very deliberate and eternal way of the Native Americans.
Archetypal, you could say.
I guess we could go that far.
This was the tradition.
This is tradition
Which
in
kept
example.
the cultures alive.
True.
And this?
This is Red Cloud, one of the Ogallala Sioux chiefs, who was the leader at Little Bighorn.
Oh, really?
In the advent of Custer. One of the more powerful chiefs, noted through history. This image, of course, taken in the later years, probably a little after 1900. This image shows the resignation after that time.
Yeah.
Shot in the hand, an Apache warrior chief in a magnificent costume of ermine. Again, this dynamic profile shows the royalty, to me,
that's for sure.
that these peoples had.
Now, you mentioned that the last image, Red Cloud, and this, and the others in this last series for the time being, are of the Plains Indians, a different geographical region.
Exactly, yes. These are the nomadic tribes that lived in contact with the buffalo up until the turn of the century.
And this is the Medicine Man.
This is and fine illustration. Some of the works, the peace pipe, the symbolic buffalo, and the tribal garb of the medicine man in his practice. Note the wrapping, the simple wrapping ceremonial robe. All right, that probably was discarded in some of the ceremonies.
And for our last image for the moment, Neil, before we return to Santa Fe to pin you down and get the rest of the Curtis imagery on tape.
Come and get it.
Do tell.
Another time. This is the ultimate image on the Little Bighorn, titled Apache, which is the tribal name, but this is the actual spot where the biggest exchange went, right alongside of the river.
And what year was this photograph?
This photograph was done, let me get a little look here, in 1908. All right, so they were still existing in teepees. There you see the horses and, released for the evening. An ultimate depiction.
Thank you, Neil, for walking us through this legend. Really, it's extraordinary work, and I think that you're helping to bridge the gap between peoples through your consistent efforts over time to bring Curtis's work to the forefront and to the people.
Thanks. It's a pleasure.
It runs all your wells if you have a well in your backyard. It is essential for water. Water is the other thing that's extremely important. We can't do without very long. Although people living in the country out here are in much better shape because there's always some water nearby somewhere, and you can go out and, if you have to, get it and boil it and drink it. So it's not like water is not such a terrible concern, except people who live in cities have a very major problem with water. That is a real concern. Transportation. We know for a fact, this has been admitted to by one of the major oil companies, that they will be closing their refineries at the end of 1999 because of another problem that I haven't talked about, which is called the embedded chip problem. These are tiny microprocessors that are located throughout our entire infrastructure, especially in manufacturing facilities and they are used in electrical utilities and water utilities. They monitor the flow of energy, they monitor water flows, gas pipe flows. They also are used in all kinds of manufacturing systems. Because of these embedded chips, which cannot really be tested, and probably most of which will not be replaced, there is great uncertainty about what will happen with these huge systems. So we have things like, there are 25 to 50 billion of these chips all over the world. If even under 1% of them fail, which is what the predictions are, somewhere in that range, under 1%, we're still talking about somewhere between 10 and 20 million chips failing. It only takes one chip to cause a huge problem in a huge manufacturing facility. That is why the oil companies are going to be closing down their refinery, this one oil company, at the end of the year. And then they are going to have a very large staff there, and they are going to reopen the refinery section by section, testing every piece of it very carefully, because they are terrified that they could have an accident, and they are very concerned about that. And I think that's a very good strategy. I think that's very wise. They are also stockpiling gasoline in order to have a supply available for the public during that period when they're doing that. But it depends on how long it's going to take them to get their refineries back up, the impact that could have on our transportation systems. And if we do not have interruptions in electricity, you could have problems with gasoline pumps, all require electricity. Electricity is required for telecommunications. And in order to have electricity, you also have to have telecommunications. So you see how these systems interact with each other. And telecom, they have, in order to fix telecommunications, phone companies, to place a phone call, we rely on not only the major carriers like AT&T, but local phone companies in different cities and towns all around the country. All of those local systems have to be working for you to place that phone call in a smaller city or town. So really, the readiness of many of these smaller companies is going to be the issue in having a working phone system. We don't know. The indicators are that many of these systems are waiting and getting themselves ready. So we have an issue there. Medical services. Joel Ackerman, who is the president of RX 2000, which is a consulting firm that's dealing with hospitals and healthcare facilities across the country, says that the healthcare industry is one of the most unprepared sectors in the entire country. In our whole society, the electronic chips that are found in monitoring equipment, hospital computers, prescription databases, and in all the other kinds of equipment used in hospitals are really not ready, and they are not really seriously dealing with this issue. And he's extremely concerned about the condition of the healthcare industry. So we have an issue here that we need to look into. So, and now for the good news. Now I know this sounds terrible, but I'm going to tell you as we get further into this what the opportunities are here. I gave this talk to a group of community action agencies in Washington, and I said, I gave this sort of scenario, and I said, and now I'm going to tell you about the opportunities, and everybody broke into laughter because they couldn't see any opportunities. There could possibly be opportunities, but there are. But some of the big international consulting firms have looked at this whole issue. Their estimate is, and this again is just an estimate, but people are estimating based on the best that they can do with the data that they have. 15% of the Fortune 1000 companies will probably fail. 300,000 small to medium-sized businesses will probably fail. Businesses who do not do the computer remediation to fix their computers will not be able to function, and they will simply be put out of business, which is a really serious issue. The Information Technology Association of America did a survey of companies all over the world. 44% had already had failures in their computer systems, 67% reported test failures, and 94% of the people in these companies predict a world crisis based on Y2K.
Can you repeat that?
Sure. Technology Association of America. This is Harris Miller's the president. I know him. They did a survey of companies. 44% had already had computer failures. 67% reported they had test failures. which is the final stage, which is not surprising. You do a lot of computer code repair, and then you run tests, and you expect to have a lot of failures, because the testing is to look for all the little bugs and fix all the mistakes that you made while fixing the first mistake. But then 94% of those people that they interviewed predicted a world crisis based on the Y2K problem. The biggest part of this issue that's the most challenging is the rest of the world. The United States is far ahead of the rest of the world. Most of the rest of the countries are 12 to 24 months behind the United States in being prepared for this problem. Now you can think of countries that are less developed and think, well, they'll be better off. They don't have as many computerized systems in their countries. They'll be better. But it's not true, because in any city, in any country in the world, if they have infrastructure, they have computers. And they are using the systems that they got mostly from the United States. They have the same problems that we do. And if they have not started working on these problems, they are going to have some difficulties. Much worse, in fact, than we have in this country. And I will read you a little statement by the CIA about this. This is from Sherry Burns, who is a spokesperson for the CIA. She said, "We are concerned about the potential disruption of power grids, telecommunications, and banking services, among other possible fallout, especially in countries already torn by political tensions." They are very, very concerned about serious social upheaval in many countries around the world. Because one of the things that could happen is you could have a disruption of water and electricity in major cities, which could cause huge problems in those countries where they don't have the backup systems and they're not really ready. So the impact of this international situation is going to be the biggest for us in terms of our economy. About 40% of the American economy is international. There is a grave concern from the banking industry of their ability to conduct international financial transactions once we get into 2000 or even. Because in order to process information, checks, bills, payments, bills of shipping and sale, computers in this country are importing billions of lines of data every day into their computers from all over the world in order to allow international finance to take place. Well, the situation is, if you're a bank, like Bank of America or Citicorp, and have spent $300 to $400 million fixing your computer systems to make it Y2K compliant, if you import data from another bank that is not fixed, that is not correctly remediated, you can corrupt your entire system. Unrepaired data can destroy and ruin a completely Y2K compliant system. This is a huge problem for banks because they have to figure out how they can firewall off this data that they're bringing in from around the world but they have to process the data. So they have a very big problem. Now there are filters you can put on systems, but they're very time consuming and very costly to run. So there's huge problems here. They are very, very concerned, the banking industry, about their ability to transact business internationally. We expect that the American banks will probably be compliant for the most part. The FDIC is really on them, watching them very closely, and most of them that are still around, one of the things that has driven the consolidation in the banking industry has been the smaller banks who do not have the resources to fix the Y2K problem have been taken over by the bigger banks because they're able to fix this problem. That's one of the things that has driven the consolidation in banking, although it's not been talked about at all. Now, the question is, what do we do about all this? Well, Ed Yardeni, who is the chief economist for Deutsche Bank Securities, who you may have seen on 60 Minutes, has been forecasting a 70% chance of worldwide recession for over a year and a half now. Now, you think, we're America, we're an independent nation, we're one of the most powerful countries in the world. How can we be that affected by the Y2K problem? I'm going to give you a very graphic example. This is a pencil, right? Good old American pencil, right? We all use these all the time. I'm going to tell you how this pencil is created, manufactured. To construct this pencil requires cedar from California that is coated with a lacquer made from Arkansas castor beans. The lead is actually graphite mined in Sri Lanka, mixed with Mississippi clay, paraffin from Texas oil refineries, candelilla wax from Mexico, and ammonium hydroxide, animal fats, and sulfuric acid from other locations. The metal that holds the eraser is brass and nickel, probably mined in Africa or Asia. The eraser is made from rapeseed oil from the Dutch East Indies, pumice from Italy, and cadmium sulfate. That's a pencil. So one of the issues that we're going to be facing here is our supply lines of resources, what we actually have available to work with in terms of our manufacturing capability. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal 2 days ago about the big auto manufacturing companies. They are in a terrible fix. Not only do they have a problem with the embedded chips in their plants because they've done it where they've rolled the clocks ahead in their chips in one of the big plants, the GM plant. The entire plant completely shut down. Not only that, it locked everyone out of the plant. They couldn't even get in the doors. But their biggest problem is the fact that they have 80 to 100,000 suppliers of auto parts all over the world. And they have about 40 to 50,000 of those suppliers are essential parts. They cannot make a car without. In order for them to produce a car, they will have to know that every one of their suppliers all over the world is completely Y2K compliant. Not only that, all the shipping lines are Y2K compliant. Every ship that transports materials is loaded with microchips that are used to manage the direction of the ship and all the rest. The port facilities are full of computer systems and embedded chips from all these port facilities all over the world. There are huge potential problems with transportation and communication. It is generally said that forget about the telecommunication systems in South America. We will probably not be able to make telephone calls to South America. Everyone pretty much agrees on that. They're not even trying to fix the problem. Asia, Russia, China are not seriously working on these problems. Even Japan is way, way behind. Even many countries in Europe, because they have been so involved with the euro, they haven't really been paying much attention to Y2K. So you really have an issue here that is going to transcend anything we have seen in our lifetimes, in my view. And people who have studied this think that, yes, we don't have absolute facts, but when you look at the information that's there and the potentiality, it doesn't take very many of these systems not to function to cause huge impact on our society. So what do we do? Well, it would be interesting for you to know that a lot of people are already doing a lot. They did a poll in August by Americans Talk Issues Foundation, which is a poll done by Alan Kay and Hazel Henderson, a friend of mine. And they said 10% of Americans have already purchased some emergency home supplies, and 39% of Americans are considering it. That was in August. So I'm sure it's much higher by now. So what we need is a sense of calm urgency about this problem. Public safety and community cohesion must be the cornerstones of any kind of public awareness. Now, I'm sure some of you have tried to talk to your neighbors about Y2K or your friends. Have you tried this? Yeah? Okay, what's been your experience? Don't let her worry about it. Right. They'll take care of it. Yeah, Bill Gates will solve it, right?
Because I won't be flying in the year 2000.
Yeah, I won't be flying in the year 2000, right? So it's not going to affect me. Well, that's the thing. People just do not understand the systemic nature of how computers have become so interwoven in our entire life. They just don't understand it. And I don't blame them. I mean, it's an unprecedented development in our culture and our history, and we're still trying to grasp the meaning of all of this. But we did an interesting thing in our work in Washington, D.C. We have in our center, we've been holding meetings for the last 3 or 4 months, and we've created 5 community preparedness groups out of those meetings. And we decided that because people weren't really dealing with this issue, we took Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of acceptance about having a terminal illness. In a sense, you could say maybe that the American dream has a terminal illness. And so we decided to apply this to Y2K. So we said, well, denial is the first stage, right? It's just too improbable. I mean, the idea that the most powerful nation in the world would be brought to its knees by a misprogrammed computer code just boggles the mind. It makes no sense. And people don't want to hear about it. They're busy with their lives. They just don't care. Then when people begin to take the information, they get angry. They say, how could they do this to us? How could they be so stupid? Did you see that fellow on 60 Minutes who said the all-time award for human stupidity in all of history would be in this particular situation? I think he's right. But blaming corporate leaders or government leaders for this problem doesn't really help, doesn't really solve the problem. And then people get into fear. They get into real fear about what's going to happen to me and to my family if we don't have all these things we've come to depend on. And so then there's a sort of panic, and people go in and they start, they're going to run out and buy all kinds of food and water and take care of themselves, and they build up a good supply of stuff. But then the big question comes, the big question. What's going to happen when my neighbor comes and says, I don't have any food, can you give me some food for my kids? Or somebody else shows up and says, I want some of your food. What are you going to do? Where does that lead you? Because you begin to realize that as long as just you are ready, you are not ready. The only way to be prepared is to have everyone prepared. The only security is to make us secure. That is the only answer to this problem. So people go beyond that stage, they go to the level of acceptance and realizing, okay, we have a problem. We're intelligent human beings. We've been living on this planet for thousands of years. We've lived before without some of these services. I'm sure we can do it again. And so what are we going to do? How are we going to plan? How are we going to prepare? That is the issue. That is the core of what we need to be focusing on. And that is really where people get to. And I think that's where more and more public officials and people in responsible positions are beginning to say, we don't know how serious the problem is going to be, but we know we must help people prepare. Now we have a problem with information, of getting out accurate information and enough information to people. And there's a lot of disinformation being put out, and people doing what we call happy talk. You know, you get a public utility representative stands up and say, well, how are you doing with your remediation on the water treatment plant or the electrical utility? They say, oh, we're working on it and we expect to be ready. You know, that's what we call happy talk. That is nothing. That gives you no information. You want to ask them very specific questions like, have you finished your remediation work? Have you booked your testing on computers? Have you started your testing? Have you completed your testing? What were the test results? Have you done independent verification of your test? Where are you with all your backup systems and your contingency plans? These are the kinds of questions we need answers to. That's what you need to be asking. So, yeah, I'm going to go into all that in more depth. I will. So, we're in a situation with these very long supply lines with, current pay ratios of 326 to 1 between the highest and lowest paid person in average American corporations. 326 to 1. Can you believe that? That's the current average. Half the world's population is probably starving. 1% of the U.S. population owns and controls 40% of the wealth of the United States. 20% in the last 20 years. That's the current situation we find ourselves in. If this isn't the situation ripe for change, I don't know what is.
Hallelujah.
And change is what we're going to have, like it or not. And some people are going to like it, and some people are going to be ready. So our goal here is to have as many people ready as possible. So, interesting survey was done on Y2K. 89% of the respondents wanted a simpler, more decentralized systems so that communities could be more self-reliant and independent. Isn't that interesting? 89% of the population. One of the problems we face in our society is not that we don't have new ideas about how to organize ourselves or how to create a better world. The problem is we have so many old ideas taking up all the space, taking up all the time, taking up all the focus of attention, right? And old institutions that are taking a lot of the resources and not allowing these new things to come out. So I'm going to start a new social movement. It's going to be called the Organizational Right to Die Movement. So we can actually allow organizations who have completed their useful life cycle to go out of existence so new ones can be born. I actually think this is part of what Y2K's gift is going to be to us. Is things that are no longer serving us will no longer be there. I think that's really likely. So what does this mean for us here in the Valley? Well, if you think about it, if we have a breakdown of some of our infrastructure and our individual and collective sense of purpose together, we could mobilize a whole rebirth and recreation of our way we live our lives based on environmental awareness, alternative energy and organic farming, socially conscious investing, alternative currencies, complementary medicine, co-ops of all kinds. I mean, the Valley is a wonderful possibility here because there is already an ethic here of cooperation and sharing and all the things that you really do so well here. So I think that there is the potential for some real powerful positive change. No, I'm going for Alan Cole. Sorry, we have a little time glitch here. I always thought it was 2000. I've run out of time. Okay, well, one of the things that I think we can do is, as a community, really imagine how we make our decisions. Right now, most people feel very disconnected from the political process because there's not a lot of opportunity for our input to be brought into the political process. I think the decisions that are going to be made are going to affect your lives very directly, and I think people are going to demand more of a direct participation in the decisions about what is done in local communities around this issue, and I think you should. I think that's very important. We have the potential for rethinking how our activities impact the earth. We have the potential for working towards a more just and equitable distribution of resources. All of these things are really possible. Now, what do we know about what happens when we have a crisis? There are certain things that we know from observing crises all around the country, earthquakes and fires. A shared purpose and meaning brings people together. People display amazing levels of creativity and resourcefulness when there's a crisis. People want to help other people. The individual agenda starts to fade away, and you really get involved in really helping others. People learn instantly and respond at very high speeds to problems. The more information people get, the smarter they are in their responses. And leadership behaviors appear everywhere as needed. So you wind up with multiple leaders emerging everywhere. People who have expertise and know how to organize and get things done. You have leadership emerging all around you. It's a whole new model of how things are. And that's what happens in crises. And I expect that to happen for us here in this valley and for people all over the country. We are going to have a whole new way of working together. Now, Y2K really confronts us with the issue of what is our paradigm? What are our values? What are our perspectives? What really is important to us? And I have a couple things I want to say about that, and then we're going to talk about preparedness. I think there's 7 different principles that you can talk about that are really relevant here about how we handle Y2K from a values perspective, from a perspective of the way we hold it. The first one is we are part of a unified system. No man or no woman is an island. We are not separate. We either solve the problem for everyone or we don't solve it at all. When we recognize that there is a spirit in all of us, that we can deal with this crisis in ways that honor what's in every human being, we have to find ways to bring that spirit out of people. That's what we need to do. Human beings are so inventive and so creative. I cannot believe that we won't come up with dozens, hundreds of new ways of doing things as a result of this crisis. That's who we are as human beings. Goodwill goes a long way. Goodwill begets goodwill. It helps transmute violence and isolationist tendencies, and it feels good. So having an attitude of goodwill towards other people and not allowing yourself to fall into fear is really important. It's really important to keep a spirit of goodwill towards the people around you, your neighbors, everybody, because that creates an atmosphere where people feel safe and they don't fall into these survivalist tendencies. Respectful relationships build trust. Trust is the most important currency of community. When you have trust that's been built up because you've talked together beforehand, you've done some planning, you've thought through how you're going to respond, you've built relationships among people in your neighborhood, in your community, then you're in a different position when the crisis might happen. United we stand. Sounds like Ross Perot, right? Solutions are generated when all points of view are given weight. The wisdom of the community is the most powerful tool. When everybody's point of view is considered, then you have a whole picture that really works. My favorite one is, the force is with us. Miracles can happen. We have seen instances of incredible things happening in moments of crisis, all sorts of things that we cannot predict, that we cannot assume. We know what will happen exactly because wonderful things happen in crises as well as terrible things. Synchronicities happen, enlightenment comes, new vision comes on how to deal with things. It's amazing what can happen. Winston Churchill during the war spoke of a guiding hand that interfered and protected Britain from Hitler. Many people have had these kind of experiences. Another principle is change is the only constant. Everything physical is really impermanent. I learned this really well when a few years ago, some of you may remember, our house was burned down by an arsonist in our community, and everything that seemed so permanent and so real disappeared in 2 hours. So that was a very interesting experience in impermanence. But change is constant. So it's really going to be how well we move through this is how well we can be resilient, adaptable, flexible, and move with change. Because change is going to be there. And that's really the attitude of mind that we need to hold, is really having change. And finally, blessings can come in disguise. There's nothing like a good challenge to focus the mind and clarify the values. So we're facing a challenge here that will, I think, focus all of us to start taking a real hard look at what's important to us, what's important about our lives, and where we really want to go with this. So I know you're all very anxious to hear about what can I do? How can I help my community prepare? Although it's not clear how serious the crises are going to be, it is increasingly clear that there are going to be serious disruptions in our systems. That is pretty sure by most experts on the issue. The thing about this is it's unique. This happens in multiple locations at the same time, all over the country and all over the world. Our normal way of handling disasters will not be applicable. Because the normal way to deal with a disaster is you have a particular geographic problem in an area, flood or a fire or something. Help pours in from all around the country sometimes to help deal with that problem. If we're having a simultaneous crisis all over the country, we cannot expect that to happen. It will not. I have talked to people in the Red Cross. They said there is no way that they can deal with a crisis like this in their usual manner because they do not have the resources to meet a multiple crisis all over the country. Neither does FEMA. We are going to be relying on the resources of our own communities and what we have done to prepare to deal with this problem. That is where it's going to come down to. So what do you need to do? We're going to go into great detail this afternoon and some of the other speakers about organizing a community and what you need to do. But my basic overview is, first you need to do is build a team. Build a team. Assemble a task force of people led from all areas of the community. That includes people with emergency planning skills, local businesses, philanthropic and healthcare representatives, public officials, educators, media, citizen groups, and everybody should be engaged in this process. But you need to have a contingency plan in your communities, in your towns, about how you're going to handle these problems. You need to spread the word through communication channels, and you need to monitor your systems. You need to go out as citizens and try to find out as much as you can about the readiness of your natural gas and fuel systems, water and sewage treatment, electrical facilities, communications, waste disposal systems, food supply continuity, financial services, local government services and emergency services, air transport, hospitals and healthcare, services for the vulnerable. All of these things need to be looked into and thought through. How would you handle disruptions in the usual flow of things? So you have to have a backup plan. You have to have a plan for maybe a 2-day disruption of electricity. You should have a backup plan, week disruption of electricity or occasional interruptions in electricity for a 2-week period, and even for a longer period of intermittent electricity service. These are the kind of plans that need to be developed. But I am confident that the people of this country, who may have gotten a little soft, may be spending a little too much time in front of the computer and gradually turning into couch potatoes, but when the moment strikes and people are asked to stand up and do what needs to be done and take responsibility and work together and do the old-fashioned barn-raising kind of consciousness that built this country, the people of this country will respond and we will get through this crisis with flying colors. Okay, we have some time for questions. I'm sure you have lots of them, and we'll try to keep them focused on not too detailed, but more larger questions. You'll have plenty of time for detailed questions in the workshops. Yes?
Will these or similar remarks be available either electronically or in some other form?
Audio and video, yes. Both. Yes?
Yes, what about major urban centers like New York?
Major urban centers are one of the most problematic. Yes, the question was, what about major urban centers like New York? They are one of the most problematic situations. I am encouraging people, if they have any option of going out of an urban center and staying with family or friends or anywhere out in the country in smaller towns, to do that. I think because it will then reduce the demand on services for those who have no option to do so. So that then the infrastructure that's there, whatever is put in place, will be able to service the needs of those who are most needy. The problems are serious. You have water distribution issues, and you have food and heat. Those are the core issues. Proposals have been made to make the schools the focal point. And Doug's going to talk about this in his talk, so I won't go into too much. But really, places designated, which is a normal disaster approach, where they would put in backup generators. The National Guard, all around the backup generating equipment, they have all kinds of equipment that could be mobilized, brought to a school, and they could provide electricity, you could cook food there if you had food stored, and you could heat it, and people could stay in the schools who had no other option. And I think that's real. In fact, in Canada, as some of you have heard, the military is now on full alert to be preparing for year 2000. They are planning to be able to go into towns and communities all around the country and help to deal with whatever emergency situations are needed. And there's work going on for the National Guard in this country as well.
What are they going to do when those white trucks that come out of Yankee Road turn over on Dickinson Bridge? Is FEMA prepared to take care of it? Is the fire department prepared to take care of it? Is anybody in this room prepared to take care of their family in case of that kind of disaster, which is imminent?
You're talking
They
about...
say we can expect 19 accidents this year.
I'm sorry, what kind of accidents?
There are, Yankee Road is still cleaning up. It's going to take until the year 2010 to finish it. And we have the danger of being inundated in the muck when the rains come.
Yes, those are all issues. I don't make light of those issues. There are a lot of issues around nuclear plants that are very serious and difficult. That's correct. The only thing I know to say about that is the citizens have to go out and make a lot of noise about those issues and get public officials to respond. Yes?
I just wanted to ask, I'm having a hard time getting a fix on, well, I'm sure everyone is, but on the time period for the worst disruptions. I mean, when you talk about 2-day or 2-week, or you talk about the stock market crashing, or you talk about how long it takes to get things back up. What are some of the technical aspects of getting things back online?
Yes. The problem is not just going to be in January of 2000. There are likely to be some beginnings of problems in January of this year, 99, which will accelerate throughout all of 99. In April, Japan, Canada, Mexico, and New York all go on fiscal 2000. In July, 40 states do. And then in September, the federal government goes on fiscal 2000. So we will see early indicators of how serious these problems are going to be. As far as how long the disruption period is going to be, no one knows. We really don't know. You have to make an estimated best guess of what you want to prepare for, and you have to the range is from 2 days to 3 to 4 months, as people are saying, anywhere in that range. But I would say a middle ground would be a safe side middle ground would be 2 months with sporadic kinds of interruptions and problems. Yes?
What if it's 2 years?
If it's 2 years, by then, at least we'll be into summer, won't we? So we'll have a chance to do a little bit more preparing for the following winter. Yes, winter is the issue.
What do you do with the dead people in Springfield?
Repeat.
The question was, what do you do with the dead people in Springfield? I'm sure we will figure out a way to solve that problem, but that's not one of our major problems. I mean,
It's going to be a problem, I'm afraid.
it could be, yeah. I mean,
Any city.
Yes.
Is there a problem just turning over into calendar year 99 because 99 is in fault mode with a lot of computer
Yes.
programming?
There is concern that a lot of programs they set up so that 99 means end file, and that computers would then just throw out the files at the end of 90.
Is that potentially of the same magnitude as 2000?
No, it doesn't seem to be. There's concern about it, but it does not seem to be as big a problem. And I'm sure when they go in and fix Y2K, they fix that too. Yes, ma'am.
In terms of building a team, I absolutely agree with you in terms of stages of denial, but right now I'm the Y2K in my town, in my family, and it's very difficult, and I don't know if you have any suggestions. And actually getting people on board, I mean, I hand them articles, I do as much as I can in order to get people on board, but I've managed to do.
Well, the way it's going to work, in my view, is there's an awareness curve that people go through, and they have to get pieces of information along that curve, and when they hear it enough times from enough reputable sources, and 60 Minutes was very helpful on this, as they hear it, then the curve starts to go up, and they start to take it more and more seriously. That's just the way it's going to go.
My experience in 60 Minutes was that one person who spoke was quite optimistic,
I can't
and they
hear
all
you.
hung up to that point.
People who are in denial took the one person on 60 Minutes who was optimistic and said, well, it's not going to be a problem. But really all the other evidence was not really, yes, go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to stop soon. Okay. Go ahead, back there.
There seems to be a tremendous opportunity for black and white thinking surrounding this. In other words, when someone says this won't be year 2000 compliant, to equate that with total failure. And that's often not the case. There's often very minor problems in year 2000
That's right.
compliance. And I think it's important for people to realize that you can easily overreact by saying we're not going to be ready. And what that means.
That's right. The point is that by saying we're not 2000 compliant doesn't necessarily mean the entire system would be non-functional. It could mean minor problems that could be fixed or worked around. So you can't assume that it absolutely means total failure. That's part of the ambiguity of the situation that you have to deal with constantly. Yes?
How can we use this situation from an ecological point of view to increase the use of alternative power such as solar, etc.? I wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, I think it's going to be very natural that... How can we use the situation to increase the use of alternative power, solar power? That I think is going to evolve. It's already evolving. Solar companies are backed up about 6 to 8 months with orders for both photovoltaics. There's a huge run on diesel generators. That's not alternative energy, but clearly the demand is there now and is growing rapidly. And I just think it will continue as if we have a serious crisis with infrastructure, people's sense of absolutely depending on it and not having any backup systems will probably change. And we will perhaps change our relationship to just totally assuming it's always going to be there. We will want to have more backup and other alternative systems. I think that will grow out of this. Yes?
What about automobiles and embedded chips? Is it true that certain automobiles of ancient will just stop?
Yeah. The question about automobiles and embedded chips in cars, the automakers, the big three, are all saying it's going to be fine. Now, whether that's a happy talk or not, it's been very difficult to get, and people have researched this a lot, and they have not been able to find any indications. Supposedly, cars between, I think it's 94 to 96 are the most vulnerable, but I'm not positive about the dates on that. But it's very hard to get any accurate information, but it doesn't look like it's going to be a huge problem, as we had thought earlier. Yes. One or two more, I'm going to have to end.
I'd like to acknowledge your sobriety in this. I think that one of the most important things we could do is to get this videotape out to this country.
Yes.
I've been studying this for years, and this is the most sober information that I've gotten in years, and I really thank you for that. It's a philosophical as well as almost a spiritual point of view, and
yes.
You're one of our leaders right now. We need to acknowledge that this video
it is my greatest joy to serve you. Oh, I can't repeat that. He's appreciating the fact that I've given a sober presentation that also includes a spiritual or higher vision to it, and that has certainly been my intention all along to do so. Yes. Yes.
Trying to articulate a little more of what the woman was explaining, with trying to help people get out of denial and into some action. I'm wondering if there's a way that you have found to simply phrase to people as you have dialogue on a daily basis. Everyone I talk to is just so, laughing about it. And even my mother says, do you remember the time when we were practicing for World War III, got under our desks, and did it really happen? So I need to move those people from, yes, that didn't happen, but this is somehow different. So what's an easy way to let people know that we need to be prepared, but make it technologically based?
Well, one of the strategies that people are using is, for people who really don't want to hear about it, is you send them an article, a very simple article, with a little post-it on it that says, isn't this interesting? And then you wait about 2 weeks, and you send them another one. You say, take a look at this. And what you're doing, and then 3 weeks later you send them another one that says, hey, what do you think of that one? And what it does give people time to process this information, because this is a lot to take in, to consider the reality that everything you know around you could be affected in a very major way. It is inconceivable for many people, and I understand why they're in this denial phase. And so it's like you have to give people time to work themselves into it.
But that's difficult to mobilize those little teams and communities to create the seven house theory.
You do, you work with the people who are open, who are ready, and then that's you start with whoever's interested and open, and there goes from there. Boom, you have something you want to say to that issue?
Yeah, I'd like to say that I'm going to be speaking on community preparedness here shortly, and I will be able to address some of these concerns.
Great. Okay. I'm going to have to be out. One more I'm going to have to do.
Which 2 or 3 articles would you send?
What I
If you had 2 or 3 articles that you wanted to send periodically, which 2 or 3 would you choose?
Well, there are thousands of them.
Yeah, you're the person who's gone through it.
Now you touch that, there's a very wonderful article, Social Chaos of Social Transformation. It really is a very hopeful article as far as bringing community together.
There is a guidebook. The Ugly Leader is putting out a guidebook to community or preparedness for Y2K. There's a 120-page guidebook that's going out with every issue of Ugly Leader. They printed almost 500,000 copies extra. Oh, here it is, right there. Great. It's really excellent. It has the best articles on Y2K and a lot of good community preparedness information. This is going to be widely available. They will print it until nobody wants it anymore. So,
is that the one that's a bucket copy?
Yeah, I think so.
Can I just mention? I brought a dozen or so copies, a couple dozen copies here for people who are organizing groups of people, so I can give you a copy if you come up to me, like over lunch sometime.
They're $1 a copy, aren't they?
Yeah, I'm just giving them out to people who are organizing groups of people.
You can buy 50 at once, bring 50 for $50.
Yeah, you can buy them in either individually or in batches.
Where?
I'll write down the address and put it on a couple of the different...
This will probably be one of the best resources available for you.
Is that available now?
We have a few out front, but you can order it. It is available now, yes. It's in print. Yeah.
I have a simple...
It's also on the internet.
You can get it offline.
Response to this question, which is that the World War III bomb scenario depended on somebody maybe pushing a button. But just like people are accustomed to their microwaves turning off when the timer says it's time to turn off, these computers will do what they're going to do because the timer is set. And perhaps that simple response will get people thinking.
Right. Okay. I'm going to go ahead.
I have a good short article which I have several copies.
All right. I'm going to close now because I've gone over my time and I must be fair to the other speakers. So thank you all very much for being time. National consultant on Y2K has been on Nightline on Y2K and is really very, very knowledgeable, has a unique perspective on the whole issue. So Doug.
Doug Carmichael.
Okay, because of the time, if you don't work with me, I'll try and work with you. My guess is, because you've been sitting for over an hour, let's take a 1-minute stand-in-place break and just stretch out. Just so you know what the timing is, I will stop right at 11 o'clock, so you can pace your body needs till that. Okay, if I can get you back. Part of the thing I don't like about technology is that the microphone gives me a kind of status that you guys don't have, so I don't get to listen to you as much as you've got to listen to me. Also, the lights make it hard, and because the microphone is sort of fixed in places, it's all taped down. I can't walk around the way I normally would. So feeling a little constrained. Let me start out by saying a little bit about why I'm talking to you about this. I started out as a physicist and in the late 50s and got more interested in the people than in physics. I went off and became a psychoanalyst, and then I kept going in that direction and became an anthropologist and tried to combine all those. Then I realized that as an anthropologist you didn't have access to the interesting parts of society. So I became a consultant, and since then I've been able to get into all sorts of interesting things, of which this is one. The way Y2K started for me was I was working on a project 18 months ago, and a group of us were going to have dinner, and while we were waiting to get our seats in the restaurant, I said to a guy who was head of Y2K for one of the northeastern states, what are you working on these days? And he said, you really want to know? And there was a sharpness in his language which really shook me, because I wasn't used to that. And I said, sure. He said, well, we're working on the year 2000 stuff. I said, well, tell me about it. He said, we're going to spend the entire state budget for IT through 2005 and do no other projects, and we're still not going to get it fixed. I was really pretty shocked by that. I said, explain it to me. As he talked, I noticed that he was getting more scared. And in a business environment, you're not used to seeing that, and I knew I was up against something that was really quite unusual. The next day, I met with a client that's a pretty large company, and there were about 15 of us at a meeting, and I said, what are you guys doing about Y2K? And they all looked at me like I'd done something really terrible. And the leader said, we'll talk to you later. Later in the afternoon, we were off, and he said, I'll tell you what we're doing. We just spent $250 million on a way of trying to get around this problem. And just the day before yesterday, we decided that it had failed. And I thought, $250 million, and this is one corporation? Stuff is really going on. What's remarkable to me is that was 18 months ago, and in a certain way, I feel I don't know much more about the problem now than I did then. But that's a clue as to what we really have to know. The politicians don't know, the managers don't know, even the programmers don't know, the press doesn't know, and I think we're not going to know. And it tells us something about the very nature of this problem. It's not a usual kind of technical thing where you can take your car in and get it diagnosed and then they replace something and you're off. The interconnections Martin described so well are so complex. And we've got to realize that it's not just the technology. We've woven the technology into our personal lives and our commercial life and our political life so far that to pretend that it's a technical problem that can be fixed at that level is the first major mistake. To say that if people would just hold back from panic and let the technical people fix it, it would get fixed, seems to me to totally frame it in the wrong way. The idea that if we had an infinite amount of time, we could fix this problem, I think is wrong. We don't know well enough exactly what the problem is. For example, if I have a computer, and I fix all the data in my computer, so it's perfect, squeaky clean, wonderful, and it goes to your computer, and you had an MBA that was there a couple of years ago that wrote this fancy program that uses my old data, and you don't even know that that program is there, and suddenly it gets my clean new data, you could be damned. That's the nature of the complexity. It's really an archaeological mess. Gordon quoted my line, I think, that we've got an interconnected international technology which is like a shanty town built without standards and without architects. We're really facing a very difficult situation. Now, by inclination, I think often that the way we try and solve problems is wrong. We solve the problem, but it turns out it was the wrong problem. We don't do enough thinking about what it is we're really working on. And when you get a problem like this, I think often the only way you can solve it is by making it bigger, not smaller. It's actually a complex thing, and if you want to get the forces into the discussion that have helped to create it, you've got to expand your imagination. And that puts a lot of pressure on all of us to develop more discipline and more skill and take a broader historical view of what is going on. I think of this talk as being a little bit like halftime in the locker room. You know, we're halfway through the game, and how are we doing? Are we playing by the right rules? Have we defined the field right? And what really is the opposition? And what do we have to do in the time that we have? To start with a large frame, the paleontologist, archaeologist, Stephen Jay Gould has a new book that's about a year old called Full House. And Full House, as you can imagine if you haven't read it, applies to the world, Full House. And in that book he makes a speculation, which I think is just fascinating. He says the reason that we are not visited by species from other solar systems in the universe is because no species in the history of the universe has been able to develop a technology complicated enough to get here and to be able to survive socially. We don't know if it's right, but it's certainly a good idea. And I think it really frames what we're up against. How do we use technology for human betterment rather than going off the deep end? There was a cartoon in the New Yorker about 10 years ago, a bunch of lemmings running to the sea, and one says to his neighbor, "Anybody think of going to the mountains this year?" Politically, we don't know how to raise those kinds of questions about technology. With the problem that we're up against with Y2K, of course, it's because it's time-driven, date certain, that makes it so interesting in comparison to all the other problems we've been able to push off for a decade, whether it has to do with pollution, drawdown on the environment, population, political tensions, the failure of the tax system, the have-nots, all these other problems that we have. Y2K stays there in place as we move towards it, and it's not moving out further in front of us, which gives us a unique opportunity to learn from this so we can name some of the other problems too. But that's putting a huge burden on what we've got to do with Y2K, because there's also the issue of trying to get as much of it fixed as we can. Just a word on that. If you look at we're here, and here's, say, 2000, and the amount of activity to fix it is actually increasing. Most corporations expect to spend the majority of their budget in '99. So you have new programmers with new managers and organizations that they don't feel particularly bound to doing this work. And as that work is done, you introduce new errors as you introduce corrections. And from a certain point of view, the worldwide technology system is decaying as we move towards that point. We're building in problems that are going to cause us difficulties. Now, just to put it in another perspective in terms of is this a big deal? I think that question is already answered. What's happening today, like by having this meeting and the other stuff going on around the world, this is already a big deal. It's changed our social perception. The amount of learning we're all going through about infrastructure is going to fundamentally change society. But you can think of it like this, that currently the rate at which we are spending money to fix the year 2000 stuff is about equivalent to the rate at which we're spending money on national defense. It's not for nothing that Citicorp is spending between $650 and $850 million in a 2-year period to work on this problem, or the Hewlett Packard is spending $350 million, and so on down the line. The federal government is spending around $6 billion. One of the things is, I don't think anybody in the world really knows how to manage projects of that size in that time frame to a definite conclusion. So I think we're in a bit of a mess. Let me give an example of what I think is happening that's independent of Y2K, but I think has some of the same dynamic. I do probably too much flying in airplanes, and one of the things that I've noticed in the last year is a certain entropic decay in the quality of flying time. For example, one of the things that airlines are doing is scheduling the arrival time and the departure time closer and closer together. And part of that has to do with simple spreadsheet analysis about what you're doing by keeping a plane at the gate because you're paying for that gate time. Now, a simple spreadsheet says the shorter the time there, the more money you make as an airline. The problem is, it then pushes pressure on the baggage system to be able to deliver the baggage, the food people to deliver the food, the pilot to hold the plane together, and be able to take off on time. As a plane is unable to meet its schedule, the amount of time the ground crew and the pilot and a whole bunch of other people spend on their walkie-talkies or whatever it is, chatting with each other about how to pull this off, increases rapidly. So while you're getting, on the one hand, increased profit out of the system, you're putting increased stress on the human system. And there's no place in the system that looks at those things together and balances them out. A very simple example along that line, I was once working as a consultant in a large technology company, and they were very proud of the fact that they had been moving their storerooms where they distribute scientific equipment to the people in the labs to a just-in-time system, so they were using less floor space to be able to store everything. And they were getting awards in the company for doing this, until somebody kind of accidentally looked at what was happening to the order rate. And to place an order with an outside company for stuff was costing them about $75 a pop. And what they were discovering is the number of orders had gone up by a factor of 3. Not only that, but the order department was getting rewards for its increased activity. There was nobody in the whole system whose job it was to compare those two or put them together in any kind of holistic way. If you take that kind of systems mentality, you can see why we got into a mess with the year 2000 problem. The programming culture, the culture of programming computers, has always been a bit strange. Many of you are from local universities. And remember in the 60s arguments about the computer science department or computer engineering or engineering programming, titles like that, which caused a lot of faculty tension. What we see is other engineering disciplines, let's say building bridges, has built into it a sense of outside reality. That is, however good you build the bridge, it's going to decay. However smart you were, you better put in a factor of 2 or 5 or 10 to account for the fact that you've made mistakes. There was a sense of the engineering project being embedded in a physical and social reality. Programming has never had that discipline. We never looked at the human side that we were forcing people into in the way they interfaced with computers in the same way. We thought if it was smart and clean, people would adapt. Along the way, that becomes subject to financial pressure, and you can see at various points, we now have many, many examples of people who raised questions about the year 2000 starting as early as the 60s, and they're probably earlier ones. And of course, the management's view was always, not on my watch. It's not going in my quarterly report to do this now because we have competition and they're not doing it. So it got postponed and postponed and postponed until the numbers were huge. In large companies that are multi-divisional today, where you've got a corporate-wide problem, the question of how you apportion the costs to dealing with a Y2K problem is a political problem. And you try and push it down into the divisions, and they're playing a dance to try and get it not in their division budget, because it'll make them look bad. And we don't have the systems way of managing to cope with those problems. One of the things to say about the year 2000 stuff is that it's probably really the first world event. If you think of things like news spreads around the world very fast, but it is not coupled to an actionable event. The Great Depression in '29 had worldwide consequences, but it spread relatively slowly, and they were relatively confined to large shipping areas and commercial places. Most of the world was not touched by it. Even World War II. First of all, in World War II, basically no country lost its infrastructure. They were able to keep functioning. In World War II, the effects spread slowly. If you're from the American Heart, you remember towns that basically all you saw was a couple of young guys go off to war on the train, and the town stayed pretty much the way it was. This is a unique event, and we've got to think of it not as an example of something that the smart guys should have done something about. We're really, as a species, up against something that's quite unique. What I've been doing basically with Y2K is trying to think about what it is that actually can happen. And that led me very quickly to realize, if you go back with me about a year ago, people thought of Y2K as something that happened in the year 2000. So if we're here, and this is 2000, basically we'd go along and then there'd be all this stuff, and then maybe we would recover in an hour or a day or a week or a month or a year, but that would be out there. What was clear to me was just that by talking about it, people were beginning to react, either by taking money out of their bank account, or which I don't think is terribly smart personally, for reasons we can get into in the questions. Or that they were reorganizing the way their company was handling a lot of issues. There was a lot of thinking going on that was going to have a big effect before we ever got to 2000. Then some friends of mine and I were realizing that the way people are reacting now is based on their image of what's going to happen in 2000. And so we worked out some scenarios. And by scenarios, it's like you're not trying to get it right. What you're trying to do is to have a kind of map of possibilities that contains the plausible futures, within which what's really going to happen probably falls in some complicated way. But the map doesn't have to be predictive. What it has to do is contain our intuitions and judgments about what could happen. And very quickly, the scenarios that we came to said, look, there are two basic uncertainties that are in the center of all our thinking. One is, when we start getting failures, are they local or do they interconnect with each other? If they're local, the ability to fix them is really different than if they're interconnected. So that's the first thing that you have to think about in what's going to happen. To this day, we do not know the answer to that. We maybe can make slightly smarter guesses, but I don't think much smarter. The other big uncertainty is how are people going to react to what's going on? And you can see that you might get a kind of fragmentation, which could lead to a certain kind of social chaos, or you can get a coming together. I was really struck in Gordon's talk that where the audience responded the strongest was to his line about that. We're really strong by being together. So if you put those together, if we say we're going to have social chaos or social cohesion, and you treat that as a dimension, and then you cut it across with we're going to have integrated failures or isolated failures. So you get four. Oh, by the way, just about everything I'm saying is on my website, and the address for that is, you do all the HTTP stuff, then you do tmnNancy.com/Y2K. And all these scenarios are there, so don't try and get them in notes because I'm going too fast. tmn.com/Y2K. Okay, now the scenarios that you get out of this is you look in this quadrant up here, where you get isolated failures and social cohesion. That's what we call the official future. That's the happy talk Gordon was talking about, that things will cohere, we will fix this. It's going to be hard. Even to do that, we're spending a couple $100 billion worldwide to get it fixed. So even to be in that quadrant is a big deal. If you go over to the side where you get, I guess I did it the other way around. If this is the social chaos side, this is the social cohesion, this is the official future. What we have here is what we call smoke in the theater. That is, there's enough rumor and panic and distress that people do things like run on banks and cause a lot of social fragmentation when there's no real threat to the underlying viability of the social system. But we get it because of the social reaction. I want to say here very strongly that the idea that you can separate the technical from the social is an illusion. The idea that people ought to act consistent with the needs of the technical system is a kind of technical fascism that I think is just not appropriate. When you design technology, you have to take into account how people are going to react, and that's a key part. So it's not like people are bad, they're just coping with the anxiety of not knowing. If you come down here and you see that what you've got is integrated failures and social collapse. You could call that kind of the millennial collapse. And we don't need to say too much about that, except it would be pretty miserable with loss of life and all that stuff. If you come over to this side, you see you get integrated failures, but you get social cohesion. How could that possibly be? And that comes about really through communities working together to fill in the gaps, protect each other. One of the things that's impressed me a lot is a year ago, I was running into a lot of people who were having a kind of pure survivalism reaction. Get my shotgun, nail myself in my kitchen with a bunch of water and food, and tough it out. What has been alarming to me is if you make that decision a year ago, let's say, and then we've gone through real time, what's happened to a lot of those people is they have lived these months as though they had made that decision. And as the time goes by, they begin to feel lonely and isolated. This isn't a smart place to be. This doesn't lead anywhere. So people have backed away from that survivalist solution. I think it's really quite extraordinary. We can provide you with another tape. So there's a lot to be learning along the way. Now, if you start looking at these four scenarios as affecting the way people are reacting between now and going to 2000, you can see our actions are determined by what we think is going to happen. Then I began to realize that, we're spending a lot of money now to fix things. People are not talking about taking some of that money and putting it out into the post-2000 months, like say the first quarter, to think about how we could have the right stuff in place to fix things that might be broken in the most efficacious way. We're so stuck on the narrowness of our thinking, it was just up to 2000. Well, when I was thinking about that, then I started thinking about, instead of looking at 2000 as a barrier, you start looking at a process that goes from now right through 2000 out to the other side. And I noticed as I talked about that, audiences would begin to calm down and become co-creators with me about how we might do that. So instead of it being a crisis, it begins to be a little bit interesting. Then I realized, hey, we could go further with this. If you go out to, say, 2020 and look at things that are very likely to happen by then, for example, we're going to have probably a totally different infrastructure for energy, whether it's fuel cells, solar panels, and a lot of other things that are coming along the line. We've got to totally trash our current infrastructure and have a new one. Why not start sooner? Biotechnology could be used to extend the growing season to grow the things that we really want that are healthy if we used it that way. Y2K probably tends to select for people wanting to have locally controllable technologies that are easy to handle and swift, fast, light, and all that stuff. So there are all those pressures out in the future. Now the one that really got me is that if you start looking at the world economy and say, here are wages in the US and here are wages in Malaysia, economic activity will slowly bring those into balance. At the point they come into balance, you realize that producing at a distance for local consumption no longer has the economic advantage it has had for probably 300 years since the rise of the great commercial empires. And the whole logic changes. The direction is back to making communities economically viable, which means you can organize education, jobs, politics, and the local conversation around the local activity, because for the first time, that's the most interesting place. I thought, hey, wait a minute. We're here, we're going to go 2000, we can start thinking about this. Let's look at all this activity as an investment strategy that's moving out in that direction, and make it cohere around the things that we really care about. Now, that's a tricky thing. What do we really care about? I don't think that's so easy, and there's a lot of differences. One of the things that's especially important with a group like this, well, I wandered around in the hall before we met and talked to a bunch of people, and people in this group are it's almost a we then. Like I could say, the good news is we won and they lost through Y2K. But part of what we've got to really recognize is the amount of effort that major corporations, the political system, the financial systems will put into making their stuff work regardless of what goes on. So here's my kind of prediction of what's going to happen. I think that if Y2K is anywhere between a modest deal and a fairly big deal, one of the things we're going to see is more mergers and acquisitions, more losing businesses at the margin that are in trouble anyway, and we're going to get a concentration of economic and technological power. Now, at the same time, that nexus of stuff will disemploy and fail to be meeting the needs of people locally in many, many, many ways, which creates the opportunity for communities to step into that with local entrepreneurship and activity, and to begin to meet local needs with local production. I can't believe that what the future will be high-tech in many ways. We're going to have our cellular phones, we're going to have our solar panels, we're going to have a lot of stuff like that. But if we can focus on local production to meet the needs that I think are going to be there, we can see a sea shift that's happening in the logic of events. Now, one of the things you see in the discussion about how to do community preparedness has been what I think of as two models. One is the people who work, for example, the mayor, the city council, the city employees, or the county employees, think naturally that it's their response to handle Y2K. So they'll say, we're handling it, or we're not handling it, but we will, or we've hired a consultant, they'll help us out, but we're going to do it. If we need an emergency plan, we will design the emergency plan and deliver on it. I think the scale and the confusion doesn't lend itself very well to that model. On the other hand, you get the community organizing people who say, let's organize the community, and they forget to invite any of the people who have the power in town, economic or political. I think the only way you can really do it that works very well is to try and combine those together. One of the things I got to participate in that I really enjoyed a lot was a town meeting in a little town in Nebraska, Norfolk, Nebraska. And it was sponsored by the city council, the local community college, and the local educational TV station. The result was nobody felt in charge, and when people came, like they were being coerced in any way. And basically what we said was, in the morning we did presentations like this about what the possible range of Y2K effects could be. Then after lunch we had a panel, which was the head of the local bank, the mayor, the chief of police, the fire chief, the head of Y2K for Nebraska Public Power, and the head of Y2K for the telephone company, which is US West. The first thing that was striking is they all said from the panel, boy, did they learn a lot more about Y2K than they expected to from the morning. And it was clear emotionally that we had shifted their role. Instead of there being a spokesperson for their organization, they had felt the emotional reality of a group of people that needed to know what was going on and weren't being satisfied. So they saw themselves then as having a constituency that they would represent back into their organization. It was another real learning for me about how to do this stuff. Well, then having done that, and we had 230 people in the room, just about this size. And the city planner was a really neat guy, city manager, Mike Nolan. And I said, okay, you guys have heard what this is all about. Mike can't do this himself. What we need to do is organize you in the ways you want to organize. So what we're going to do is ask you to think of a group that you'd be willing to run that deals with some part of this that's important to you. And when I say go, come up here on it wasn't quite a stage like this, but close, big pieces of paper, write your idea down. We'll tape it to the wall. When we get all the ideas up, then we'll have everybody come up and sign up for the groups, and then have the meetings right here, the first meeting. And in the first meeting, trade names and addresses. We'll put them in the town newspaper tomorrow morning so anybody else can come and say when your first real meeting is going to be. And in the next 9 days, on the 10th day, Mike will meet with all the people who volunteer to be heads, and we'll plan the next public meeting where each group will do a workshop around their area, and we can also have a plenary and add new groups. And what I really liked about that was that it really cut across the power structure in the town. One of the most charming moments was where the chief of police, who was 35 years old, said, I want to run a group on how to make the town stay attractive during the time we're thinking about all this stuff, because I'm sure it'll help security and help our... So he was stepping out of role to do that. And it was just a wonderful kind of thing. I thought it was sort of American democracy at its best. That kind of activity that sows the seeds for new leadership around things that we're going to have to do, and we don't yet know what they are going to be. There's the Valley Year 2000 Action Center. There's a brochure for it outside. One of the things that they're going to be doing, and I really encourage, is being a place that's looking at early indicators. As we're going through this, there will be good signs of how things seem to be emerging that will shift what our strategies ought to be about how to cope with this. I personally think that the things that we've worried about the most, like banks and electricity, might turn out to be not the big deal. It's going to be the stuff that we're not thinking about that's really going to get us. When you go into organizations, year 2000 is so complicated. The programming, the confusion inside organizations. Take, for example, a large bank. The image of a large bank was you had mainframe computers which ran a lot of stuff. And then some people took data off of those mainframes and put them into PCs. So if you fixed the mainframes, you would be basically in pretty good shape. Then you could begin to look at the PCs and make sure people's desktop stuff was okay. What's been discovered in the last 6 months is we hire a lot of smart people into banks, like out of business school, who wrote smart little programs to do interesting things. Then they left that job, the desktop computer's still there running those programs, and guess what? You take the data out, down to the PC, and then put it back into the production line. And if you don't understand what the intent of those programs were, because you have an accurate map, model, of what the intent was and how it's working, that's going to screw you up because it can be going on and nobody has any record that it's even there. One of the ways to think about this, I'd love to have a workshop which would be kind of a Y2K movie workshop. I find that only by talking things through do we begin to get clearer about what the possibilities are. When I started on the community preparedness, the idea that was in most of our minds ago is we got to provide people with water, food, blah, 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 blah. I no longer believe that that's the issue. The idea that we have a community that goes into shock and that basically needs welfare, I think is the wrong model. I think what's much more likely to happen is in a rich society like this, and I'm really talking about the U.S. here, that if people have needs, other people will go to extreme lengths to meet those needs. If water is really critical, somebody will be willing to carry a pail of water 10 miles to deliver it to you if they can get the family jewels. That's an extreme case. But what I think is going to happen, what the movie would look like, is that our towns go into things that we actually all know a lot about, like flea markets, county fairs, stuff that's fun, where everything that people need is traded by somebody who's got a little bit of it. If heat turns out to be a problem, the siding on your house is a good thing to trade for food. That's the kind of stuff that could happen. Now, immediately it would get tied into local production. So I really think that the issue of community preparedness is not having the raw materials to deliver to people in a welfare system, but in fact to help the emergence of ethical, attractive, community-based market activity that can support a new kind of post-Y2K entrepreneurial local activity. Now, one of the things that we all have to think about a lot is that basically politics has been asleep in America for a very long time. We do not have a political society. Most of us are uncomfortable with the label citizens. We use the citizens to describe them, not us. We've become personal portfolio managers. That's our identity, either as people who go to the mall and are good consumers or who own values on paper that we manage. Citizenship is weak. We have two political parties that represent the same 20% of the population. 80% of the population is basically not invited to the kind of free market expansive economy we have right now, which is very exuberant and will try to maintain itself. As this stuff happens, and should be happening probably anyway, we're going to see the political discussion heating up and we're going to have to go back and learn stuff about politics, history, that we haven't thought was going to be necessary for a very, very long time. I think with that, just to stay with what I said I was going to do, which was to finish 11, I've already missed, so I'm not compliant. I'm going to stop there, and we just don't have time for questions. Gad, maybe we can work this so that at the end of the morning we can take 15 minutes and have all three of us up here with questions. Thanks.